Buying a camera can be confusing, especially if you're just getting into the hobby. It's the most common question I get asked is, which camera should I buy? Well, I am an advocate of Sony cameras and Canon cameras. Those are the two I recommend. Today, we're strictly going to talk about Sony cameras from the $400 US price point all the way to the $4,000 US dollar price point. Kind of analyze like the cost benefit analysis of like all these, because like I say, it can be super confusing. So let's dive in. Currently, I own two Sony cameras. One is the Sony A7IV, which I use for my hybrid professional needs. And then also I own, just for fun, a Sony A5000 that I picked up for like $200 on Facebook Marketplace. I have owned a ton of the cameras that we're going to talk about in this video over the years. So my hope in this video is to steer you in the right direction of your needs and make this research process a little bit easier. Before you go any further in your research process, I just want you to think to yourself, are you a photography first shooter, a video first shooter, or hybrid? This is super important in making the right decision on which camera to buy, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through each of the cameras. It's important to note that Sony makes an R series camera specifically for photographers, and then an S series camera specifically for videographers. And then they also make just like an A7 III or an A7 IV, which it doesn't have the S, it doesn't have the R, but it's meant for hybrid shooters, but it has some of those video and some of those photo features stripped back just a little bit. There's going to be two different types of cameras that we'll talk about in this video, APS-C sensors and full frame sensors. If you don't fully understand the differences between a smaller sensor and a bigger sensor, don't worry too much, but just know that it's going to be a whole lot cheaper for entry-level cameras like an APS-C sensor for lenses and the camera bodies. If I had to simplify it, full frame sensors are better for low light situation and getting a different style look, like that creamy, blurry background called bokeh that you've probably seen in images before, whether you recognize it or not. And stay tuned till the end of this video because I'm going to be sharing a $200 US option. It's still Sony, it's still a mirrorless camera, and it's for those beginners who just kind of want to learn camera settings. All right, so the first camera on our list is the Sony A6000, and I owned this many years ago. This camera is for the photographer who's just getting into the hobby, and maybe video features aren't as important. Yes, it shoots 1080p, but you're not going to get any 4K options. It does have a viewfinder, and it is 24 megapixels for photos, and it has good autofocus. So for a lot of people who are just starting out, it's a great option. Pair it with a nice lens, the A6000. Okay, number two on our list, coming in at $499 for the ZV-1F and $749 for the ZV-1. I did own the ZV-1 a couple years ago, and it is amazing. Who is this camera for, or who are these cameras for? It's for the new video shooter who's not worried about interchangeable lenses. Maybe you are a creator for the first time on YouTube and you want to upgrade a little bit more than your iPhone or smartphone. It's a really good option. It's insanely compact, easy to use. They have a lot of features for beginners, including just a mode where you can blur that background automatically without changing any settings. I would say don't buy this for photography. It's not a photography camera, and it actually has a smaller sensor than even the APS-C, which makes it not great in low light, so it's a 1-inch sensor. It has great 4K video. So again, you're buying this if you're shooting a lot of vlogs or YouTube content, something like this. It has a built-in microphone that is passable. It's a whole lot better than other cameras out there. So the internal mic I ended up using quite a bit. And if you check out my channel, you can see ZV-1 kind of like review video or it in action. So I will link that above. And like I say, just great for the start of YouTuber or vlogger. So that was number two, the ZV-1 or ZV-1F. All right, coming in at number three for $799 is the Sony ZV-E10. And oftentimes, this is my most recommended camera for people who are saying, hey, I want to get in at under $1,000 for the camera body, and I'm not sure if I'm just photo, just video, if I'm hybrid. So it's an APS-C sensor. This is a really good camera for video, and I would recommend it for photography because it does have a 24 megapixel sensor, but the only issue with this is it has no viewfinder, and that's kind of a bummer. But coming in at this price point, it's like the best bang for your buck for an APS-C sensor. It's got great 4K video with really good frame rates for slow-mo options. And it does have a flippy screen as well if you're looking into vlogging or YouTubing, anything like that. So that was option number 3. That's our Sony ZV-E10 at $799. Let's just pause for a second. I just want to say thank you to all my new subscribers and existing subscribers. Thank you for supporting me. And what really helps is a simple like on this video. If you can do that for me, it goes a really long way in helping the channel, and we're going for a big push this year for 2,000, 3,000 subscribers, kind of see where we end up at the end of 2023. So thank you in advance for that. All right, so the next camera coming in at just under $1,000, $999, is the Sony A6400. I also owned this camera at one point. I took it to Mexico for a professional shoot, and it was pretty cool. I was a little bit more beginner. That was probably 3 years ago now. But this camera is great for a photographer looking to grow maybe into video in the near future. So it does have that viewfinder, which the ZV-E10 does not. It's an APS-C sensor. It shoots 4K video. It has a 24 megapixel sensor on it. Great autofocus, and I do recommend the A6400 just because it comes in at a really good price point. It is good for photo and for video. And yeah, next we're going to talk about like its bigger brother. All right, so next up on the list is the Sony A6600. We're just going to gloss over this because me personally, for $13.99, I think it's quite expensive for an APS-C sensor, though it's an amazing camera. But I am going to say that there are some full frame options that you can pick up. That is just going to be better value, I think. So save up that extra $300 and choose this next option. Okay, the next camera on our list is the Sony A7III. It comes in at $16.99 right now currently. You can even get it cheaper for used options. Now, this camera still stands the test of time. When it first came out, it was the best value that you could get for your money. Remember that the A7III, it doesn't have that R, it doesn't have that S, it's just a hybrid camera. Good for photo, good for video, but not like the high-end model for either. So I think this is still a really good camera that you could start a business with, especially if you pair it with a nice lens, which is why I highly recommend this over that A6600 APS-C sensor for $13.99. Remember that you can even find one of these used for a little bit cheaper. So right out of box, you have a professional setup, 24 megapixel sensor. It has 4K video, okay frame rate options. The screen doesn't articulate, which I don't love about it, but that might not be a deal breaker for you. Think to yourself, do you shoot photography for sports, action, wildlife? Because if you do, this only shoots at a 5 frames per second burst mode, which isn't ideal, but it will still last you a really long time if you pick it up in 2023. So I can still highly recommend this camera to the masses, and I think it's a great option if you have this kind of money to spend on a camera. Okay, next on our list, we're going back to APS-C sensors. This is a video first camera. It's an APS-C sensor, comes in at $17.99, and it is the FX30. Now this is more modern. It's got the new menu systems. It came out late 2022. I can highly recommend this in 2023 if this fits your budget and you love shooting video. So what are some specs of this camera? Well, it's kind of like a cinema grade APS-C camera. So again, not ideal for photographers. It's an APS-C sensor. It's great in low light because it has like a dual base ISO at 800 and then at 2500. What that simply means is you're gonna get a whole lot better low light capabilities out of your video functionality. It does shoot 26 megapixel photos, but remember, this isn't a photo first camera. It has amazing 4K and really good frame rate options as well for that. Now it does have dual card slots, which is really helpful if you're shooting professionally, which I think you can. A lot of people aren't gonna know that you're shooting on like a sub $2,000 camera and that it's an APS-C sensor and not full frame. Your clients will never know this. It does have those new Sony menus and a fully articulating screen. So if you're video first, if you're in this price range, I highly recommend the FX30. All the reviews that have come out from it have been pretty solid. So yeah, maybe look into this. Okay, next up on the list is the Sony A7IV. It's filming us right now and it comes in at $24.99, which yes, I understand for a lot of people this is steep and I won't argue that. It was the best decision I made last year to buy it in January of 2020. 2022. And so far, I've just been blown away with the video capabilities of this camera and photo. So let's go through some of the specs of it. It is a true hybrid camera. That's why I picked it up, and I'll talk about a little bit of the downsides of having it as a hybrid as well. So it's a full frame sensor, which I love. 33 megapixel sensor. It's got amazing 4K, and that's because it's downsampled 7K, and to me that's really noticeable when I put it back against like a true 4K camera or look at my footage from a downsampled 7K. It's just really professional looking. It also does have dual base ISO of 3200, which means it's really good in low light. That FX30 dual base ISO was 2500. This is even a little bit higher, so I like that. Rolling shutter is a common issue that people complain about with this camera. So if you do pan left to right, you're gonna get kind of like a jello effect. And unfortunately that wasn't perfected, but at the same time, you're getting this hybrid camera. So you have to be willing to take some of the drawbacks as well. The 60 frames per second is cropped in 4K, which isn't terrible. You can use your feet to move back, but it would be nice if it was like a full frame equivalent. And then lastly, editing with this camera is incredible. The 422 colors that this camera puts out, I just have the ability to like really make the colors and image my own in post-production. Okay, we're almost there and we're getting into the upper tier cameras here, but for $34.99, you can get the Sony A7S III, so a video first camera, or for $38.99, you can get the FX3, which is like a bigger brother to the FX30 that we already talked about for $17.99. Now, what is the difference in these cameras? Well, they're, for all intents and purposes, like the same camera. However, there are some differences in the body. So you're not even getting a viewfinder in the FX3. You do, however, get tally lights, a top handle for XLR inputs, and you get a fan for longer runtime on video. So that's pretty cool. Now, both these cameras are great options for full frame video for shooters. It has a dual base ISO of, get this, 12,800, which is absurd and amazing in low light. It's only got a 12 megapixel sensor, but you're not buying it for photography anyway. But the A7S III does have that viewfinder, and you know what? These pictures are good enough to like pass in social media and even maybe some client work. So don't worry about that too much. 4K 120 frames per second, 422 colors. So that's even better than the A7IV. It has 16-bit RAW capabilities if you're outputting that. Full HD if 240 frames per second is something that you want, and 15 stops of dynamic range. This truly is a video powerhouse. Okay, and the last camera that I can recommend to you in 2023, we haven't talked about the photo series, the R series of cameras. So at $38.99, you can get the new, released in October 2022, A7R5. Or I'll even throw in that the A7R4 is a really good option still as well. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the differences, but the A7R4 comes in at $24.99, whereas the newly released 5 is $38.99. So the A7R5 is geared a little bit more towards video shooters or people who kind of want to get into that. So it does have better codecs. It also shoots 4K 60, whereas the 4 doesn't. It also shoots 8K 24 frames per second. I'm not there personally yet with 8K. Don't need it yet, but some other things about it. Compact flash cards are supported now on the 5. It has much better autofocus, better stabilization, and a fully articulating screen, whereas the A7R4 just had that tilting screen. All right, so that wraps up our list, but as promised, I will talk about this camera here, which is the Sony A5000, and I can highly recommend to any photo shooters who are just starting out. It even has this cute little articulating screen that you could see yourself if you wanted to for photos or video. But let's go through what's good about this camera, what's bad about this camera. Remember that it was released in 2014, so it's not going to be perfect, but it's a good option for first-time photographers. 20 megapixel sensor, lacking a viewfinder, but has a built-in flash. There are a lot of cheap lenses, E-mount lenses available for this. APS-C sensor, don't expect it to do anything really for you in terms of video. But find one used, have fun with it for like 200 bucks, maybe even cheaper. And I even used some vintage lenses on it. It's fun to mess around with, learn shutter speed, ISO, aperture, white balance, and all that good stuff. And then you could upgrade to another Sony camera that we talked about in this video. So I know that was a lot of information, and I hope you're like a little bit more clear and I hope I didn't confuse you in any way. Let me know if I missed any cameras that you would have included in this. I hope it was helpful. You can watch my full video review on the Sony A7 IV, and I'll link it like wherever, somewhere here. But yeah, thanks for stopping by the channel. Feel free to like this video and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one. Enjoy your new camera. Peace.